Hello, Christ Church. My name is Paul Fowler. I serve as our Lake Forest campus pastor, and I'm excited this week to be able to share with you in our Psalm series. And this week we're going to be looking at Psalm 89. So I encourage you every morning this week, get up, read it, walk through it, pray about it. There's a lot of great stuff that we're going to see in this psalm. And then each day I'm going to look at a few different verses and we'll talk through a lot of the connections that are happening in this psalm here. When you look at Psalm 89, what you see is it says it's a maskil of Ethan the Ezrahite. And a maskil, it's a musical term, it's a literary term, we're not really sure, but a few psalms are listed as being as such. But then it says, and this is the superscript, so this is before verse 1, it says that it's written by a guy named Ethan the Ezrahite. And there's 3 different Ethans in the Old Testament. And Ethan the Ezrahite is mentioned in 1 Kings 4:31 as Solomon was wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite. So Ethan the Ezrahite was really, really smart. And we think that this is the Ethan that is mentioned actually in 1 Chronicles, that is the son of Zerah. That's what it means to be the Ezrahite. It's the son of Zerah. But it doesn't really make sense actually when we look at the content inside Psalm 89. Ethan in this is going to be talking about David. And Ethan the Ezrahite was a great-grandson of Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And so the timing just doesn't work out because David wouldn't have been alive yet. Now, maybe you say, well, there's an error there. Why could they say that? Well, these superscripts were added much later. And we do this all the time in our English Bibles. Someone will say, this is the part where Jesus heals 3 blind men. That's what's happening there, but that's not part of the Bible. It's just a subheader. So somewhere at some point, someone thought, I think this is the Ethan the Ezrahite, but they were probably wrong. But I'm sure it said Ethan, which is why they attribute it to Ethan as such. And the Ethan that I think this is actually about is the Ethan that's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 15, where they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. This is when David is king. And we see that there are 3 different guys that are appointed to play cymbals, and one of those people was this person named Ethan. So Ethan is someone that lived during David's time, which is important for the content of this psalm. And what had happened is the Ark of the Covenant had actually been at a person named Abinadab's house, and the reason it had been there up until David was king is because long before there were 2 sons of Eli, who was the high priest at the time. Hophni and Phinehas, they were really bad and evil priests in what they were doing, and so God was actually going to have Samuel become the priest, and so they go out to battle, and they take the Ark of the Covenant with them, and the Philistines take it, but the Philistines send it back, and it had been sitting at Abinadab's house until David becomes king. And again, this is the Ethan who was appointed to play the cymbals at this celebration, who I believe wrote this psalm. And what's important about that is what comes next in the story of David is we're going to see the covenant that is established with David by the prophet Nathan. So Ethan would have been there to see this covenant. And the covenant's going to play a big part in this psalm. As well as what happens later in David's life is Absalom, his son, overtakes the throne for a little bit of time, and it makes David have a bit of a struggle in his kingdom. These are important details that we're going to see take place in this psalm this week, and it's going to be a lot of connections throughout the Old Testament. It's going to be great to study. Today, though, I just want to look at the first 4 verses, and let me read them for you. I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. With my mouth, I will make your faithfulness known through all generations. I will declare that your love stands firm forever, that you have established your faithfulness in heaven itself. You said, I've made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David, my servant. I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all generations. What we have in this first 4 verses is going to be the thesis of everything that's going to come next through the rest of Psalm 89. And what you see first, looking at verse 1 and 2, think of this as the first stanza in this poetry, in this psalm, is the first line of verse 1 is in parallel with the first line of verse 2. Verse 1 says, I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. And it talks about God's faithfulness. Look at the first line of verse 2. It says, I will declare that your love stands firm forever. So the first line in verse 1 and verse 2 are both talking about God's love. Whereas the second line says in verse 1, I will make your faithfulness known. Similar to the second part of verse 2, which says, you've established your faithfulness. So a lot of times when the Psalms are describing things, they repeat it in a lot of different ways, and they make these connections between the different verses. But verse 3 and 4 are going to do it very differently. In verse 3 and 4, we see that they repeat themselves within the verse itself. For example, in verse 3, it says, I've made my covenant with my chosen one. And it repeats that thought again. I have sworn to David, my servant. And then verse 4 talks about, I will establish your line forever. And it repeats that phrase again. Again, it's contained within one verse. And make your throne firm through all generations. What I love when you read the Psalms is it's not just a bullet point list that could have been done. It could have said, all right, I'm going to tell you about God's love, God's faithfulness. I'm going to tell you about the Davidic covenant and how God is going to establish his throne for forever. No, we don't get just 4 bullet points. We get this repetitive, beautiful, creative expression and feeling and emotion as Ethan is sharing this with us. So what I want you to think about today for yourself is, what if we asked you to write a psalm? Would you write about God's love and faithfulness for you? And if you did, how have you seen God's love and faithfulness in your own life? For Ethan, as he has been a part of what's happening in David's life, for him, he wants to talk about God's love and faithfulness through the lens of the Davidic covenant, this eternal kingdom that would come through David. I encourage you, take some time to think about God's love and faithfulness for you and what you would say, if you had to, about God's love and faithfulness through your life in many different ways.